Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Imone Chandel and I am Head of Events at Women in Mining UK. Thank you all for joining us for a very special event kindly supported by Wardell Armstrong on enhanced water and tailings management. Before we officially start, I would like to run through the usual housekeeping points. Please note, we are recording today's event, which will be available for playback on the WIM UK website. It'll also be available for playback on the WIM UK YouTube channel, so please do look out for it. If you could be so kind to keep your mics on mute during the panel discussion, that would be greatly appreciated. Your cameras may be turned off for now, but do feel free to switch them on at any time. And we will be taking questions from our audience, time permitting, via the chat button at the bottom of your screen. I must give my thanks to fellow WIM UK volunteer Beth Payne, who is responsible for organizing today's event. Beth, as always, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to support us. It gives me great pleasure to hand over to you now to kick us off today.
Thank you, Imone, and thank you to all of our panelists and attendees for taking the time out of their days to join us as well. As an employee of Wardell Armstrong and a committee member for Women in Mining, it's been a really brilliant opportunity to bring these two organisations together for this event that we've put together today. So I'm now going to hand over to Naomi Lee, who is my colleague. She's going to be moderating the session today. Naomi is a chartered engineer. She's worked in the mining and geotech sector for over 19 years. She's worked on tailings projects around the world, from scoping stage through design, build supervision to auditing and inspection. She is now a technical director with Wardell Armstrong. So thank you, and over to you, Naomi.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see such a great turnout. Today we've got a really diverse panel ranging from operators, finance, industry and consultants. So it's a really good multifaceted approach we have to water management and tailings management. I'm going to kick off by giving a very short introduction to all of our panelists, and then we'll go around for their short presentations, followed by questions and answers at the end. As we said, if you want to type your questions up, we can read them on screen. So first of all, we have Anna Poberezhna. Anna is the founder of Smart for Tech, a value-driven fintech and water nexus entrepreneur, author and advisor. Anna grew up in an ethical construction and collective environment, evolved in client relations, strategy, transformation, blockchain, fintech across a few supply chains, including metals and mining. She then went upstream to explore value chains and to capture hidden opportunities, interlinking smart, circular, regenerative nature resources and infrastructure management with blended finance at scale. We will then move on to Phil Burris, who is a technical director here at Wardell Armstrong International and heads up the hydrogeology team. Phil is a chartered hydrogeologist with 29 years experience in the UK and international consulting. He's a specialist in mine dewatering, modelling, risk and impact assessment studies. He's developed water management systems for a number of extractive industry projects and international good practice guidelines on mining, water sourcing and water efficiency. He has significant experience in groundwater risk reviews and water resource management. We then move on to Megan. Megan is, has an MSc in water and environmental energies with a background in geology. She's worked with various multinational consultancies, mining companies and research teams before recently joining Central Asian Metals and is an environmental specialist. She's passionate about mining and the environment, working to implement sustainable best practices of the mining industry to minimise the impact of the natural environment. And last but no means least, we'll be moving on to David Williamson. David has over 30 years experience working on environmental issues in the natural resource sector. A geologist by background, he's been working on project development, operations and closure throughout the world since the early 1990s. He's worked in consultancy, risk advisory and for the past 10 years in the Environment and Sustainability Department within the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, where he's currently the head of operations. specialising now in the environmental and social risk associated with the development of materialist deposits. His works include risk assessment and management, development of ESG within client management structure, and the design of reporting mechanisms. So as a whistle-stop tour through our panellists today, we'll begin by handing over to Anna.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me here. An excellent pronunciation of my last name. We were joking here before. It's like I just downsized it to Anna P. Anyhow, I will share a presentation which I will share with you. I'd like to make it as interactive as possible, however, to stick to our house rules. So a bit myself. I'm coming from the construction industry in the past, and my first dewatering experience probably was 15 or 16 years ago, when I was still a teenager, and I was dealing with angry, not birds, but angry roaring neighbors, which were actually flooded because of we were having a construction on top of the roof and doing the extension. So there are a lot of similarities between the mining and industry, called construction or infrastructure, whereas mining is more a bit dig and sell, and construction is a bit slightly more to that. It's dig, build, and then sell. And so it was an interesting experience, then layered with the blockchain and some other downstream experiences I have experienced about transparency, and went upstream right now to more sustainable water management and sustainable asset management as infrastructure management, which hopefully will attract more investment, not into just mining, but into sustainability around mining sites. And this is what I'd like to present here, and hear your opinions as well. So looking at a bit of broader picture here at the water. So those little two blue drops, this is all the fresh water that we have. And the big one is basically all water, salted, with collision, with no collision, polluted. And that little tiny one, this is actually the drinkable. So the problem of water is much more, water scarcity is actually much more prominent that we sometimes think through our days, especially living in their comfortable environments. And in contrast to iron ore, copper, or some other highly water footprint commodities, groundwater is actually the world's most extracted raw material. It possesses the greatest risk. I don't need to reinforce that. Now I think also our financiers and asset managers are jumping on the same conclusions and saying that it possesses not just a physical risk, transition risk, but also the credit risks to the company valuations. However, there is a big disconnect between the operations and what people actually experience on the ground around the community sites, and other physical risks, including the daily operations, be it pumping, be it dewatering, be it tailings management, and people in their insurance houses and offices. However, the problem is the common there. It's, I would say, three aspects which I'd like to cover. It's de-risking. Second one, it's democratizing. And third one is monetizing. How to get to that. So as we can see, the material water risks are much more than just operational. There are some economical aspects to that. And interesting that water is the biggest contributor to the pollution. When this fact I actually unbuilt myself, and the polluted waters or aquatic system across the world equals actually to the mining pollution, mining sector industry pollution. So if we convert it to their carbon credits and multiply just the cost per ton, of course, subject to reduction, we can actually calculate how much we can offset. That's just one of the metrics, but there are many more metrics which we can plug in and try to calculate it in their water risk impact metrics. So coming down to the mining world, this is basically where we are today. This is the project development sites around the world, and this is, according to CDP, the number which they calculated based on their reporting. However, we all know their numbers way different from that. I don't think it's 25 bill. Personally, I think it's much more, and their trick here is dynamic. Until we reach dynamic equilibrium in the water and other aspects of that, that's going to be quite a challenge for us to expect quarterly reports to be as forecasted and to be numbers match our forecasts always, because it's quite hard even to forecast the weather. So there is a bit of correlation to that. but it's not an end of the world. So in terms of their how we're going to move from scarcity to infinity, how we're going to think beyond the boreholes, beyond the cost of pumps, diesel trade-offs, and what are the radius of the holes or boreholes, and particular specific details, how we actually move from the details and the operational efficiency mindset to the efficacy mindset, to the effectiveness mindset. There are some steps involved. And some industries like food and bev and chemicals, they have already leapfrogged, whereas mining, I think, is one of their industries that is still in the process of figuring out how to navigate its way across and orchestrate the complex relations with its multiple stakeholders. So mining was somewhere around the water management, which is on site. Now it's in the transition between the sustainable water management and water stewardship. And the problem, or not the problem, but the challenger is around integration of those two into one coherent accounting, and then connecting into their financial KPIs. And then, of course, next, that would be a part of the de-risking. And however, mining companies really were doing great is about democratizing water access to the communities, which a lot of other industries don't do, or don't do to the extent which mining do. So there is a sort of positive and negative aspects, but okay, how to move to the monetization and actually capture the opportunities. And that's I spent last probably almost 2 years talking to mining companies and learning how it actually can be done. And it is difficult to achieve only by internalizing costs and trying to create the closed loop solutions or closed circuit systems by recycling and by reusing water within an operational site. So it requires to actually step up and think beyond stewardship and collaborate and establish collaborations within the local set up boundaries, be it 50 kilometers, 200 kilometers. It's down to it's a context, of course, specific. And in some regions, there are successful stories around that. And basically, then value of or dollar value, and not just dollar value, but also economic value of water and other natural resources like soil can be attached. And then, of course, transfer of costs and some risks can be done. So there are some numbers which have been estimated by their large organizations, and finally there are some numbers because it was difficult to calculate impact without having a specific tools. Water impact management tools are still in the process of development, and I've been working myself, was collaborating with someone last year to design one of such, but I actually moved on the capturing opportunities and trying to build their hubs rather than just tools, and develop the physical solutions around that can be financed outside the mining sector and outside private equity in mining sector, and to build this impact funds and actually extend it beyond the mining operations. And that actually the numbers which we're looking for. I mean, that's, but it's all can be done through the shared infrastructure, through the shared water management resources approach, and through the circular economy. But more interesting to that is through the upcycling, what we can recover, what we can sell additionally, what that dirty water we can look from the perspective not as a cost and not as an input cost, but actually as an output, and capturing that source rather than a cost, capturing the source and converting it into opportunity. And what would be their marginal, of course, revenues versus marginal cost of doing that, and whether it's feasible to do internally in-house, or whether it's possible to do it in the cluster between 3 or 4 operations if they're in the same location, and to build maybe water storages and water redistribution network if it's within radius of approachable radius, rather than trying to pump water 180 kilometers up the mountains, for instance. So there are many discussions around that, all the context specifics. But if we kind of start adding the cumulative effect of all of those, and we actually start seeing the difference between the dewatering in Chile, Australia, Indonesia, Brazil, are very different in terms of the context wise, and in terms of their quality of water and what type and what is their chemicals in the water. But if you look at from their integrated infrastructure and resource management, their answer is quite often relatively similar. It's integrated resource management infrastructure is the approach. Here are some interesting facts, which some related to mining and the countries I mentioned. So if we think about the water and the aquifers and their available water in the world left, we saw it's not that much. And in Australia, actually, the research showed that mining dewatering or abstracted water through the dewatering, the recent studies and their different scenarios contributes much more or accounts much more than any other sectors, including agriculture. That was something totally unexpected, because everyone knows that agriculture accounts for the 70% of their water footprint. However, not in this case. So we can only imagine what's happening in other countries where mining dewatering takes place. And if we adopt the cumulative effect, then we actually can understand the pressure on the Earth system. We literally all baking together this planet, because water function, key function in the Earth systems, it's cooling down. So it's sometimes not even their defined boundaries or scientific based targets within the region. It's also part of the planetary system. And the benefits are positive. They can be positive. There are proven cases. They still are emerging. They're still not the majority or mainstream, but there are some. This one is a Brazilian one. So there is actually total savings on the water conservation, which amounted into the net positive aspect, not even break even. But it was not in the mining concession. It was outside. But again, we can consider this as a part of the trade-off, similar to their carbon trade-off. And these are two cases. One is mining, one is gold operation, but another one is actually a transferable use case, which is can be used as well, potentially to develop new business models in the mining sector, and some companies are already doing that. It's expansion into the environmental services. So if you just stop thinking as the water as a problem, water as a cost, or water as a utility, but rather we think water as a system and what kind of services it can provide and to whom, basically mapping out the stakeholders, of course, understanding the context. Well, it's difficult when it's operation in Peelborough, for instance, and there's 300-400 nothing apart from the kangaroos, even not them. But if we're talking about maybe closer facilities to the urban areas or some other industrial clusters, there are potential feasibilities and new business revenue streams which can be generated. First of all, of course, by information exchange and understanding what is the context, what are the context risks, potential rewards, but then of course, what are the parts of the collaboration. And one of the such scalable models is industrial parks or industrial clusters. If to convert it into the specific mining sector, it's mining clusters, which do exist already in Peru. And there are successful implementation around them. Sorry, guys, 1 sec. I'll put it back. And so, this is one of the largest oil and gas corporations in Europe, Eni. So they were basically developed remediation services around wastewater, and they installed 42 water treatment plants. And some of that water they were using for their own operations. Some of them, of course, they're selling back to municipalities and supplying to people, but also they recovering salt from there. So you're free to look, but yourself, if you're more interested, or I'm happy to answer more questions around that. But it's not around just Italy. The next point, they're exporting their services to other countries. So it's, again, it's map an ecosystem and depends upon which stage of the life cycle the company itself, and whether it's mid-tier, whether it's first-tier operations, where we are, and there in terms of the ore production stage, many other aspects, of course, to consider, but it is a window of opportunity. And of course, I would like to end on the very positive note here and bring back us to the future. And a lot of people don't understand mining, because simply it's a very mainly isolated activities in the world or across the globe, very decentralized, very remote. And I always compare mining to their airline industry to some extent, because when something happens, when a plane crashes in the airplane industry, the whole world knows. But when we have car industry, basically car crashes daily, every second, and no one speaks about that. A lot of similarities between mining and that. But historically, there is a historical dependency. Mining was all about their rushes: gold rush, iron ore rush, copper rush. But there is one prominent example, which I think very few in the world know. It's Goldfields project in Australia. And of course, it was part of the gold rush. And this time it was not gold fools or fool's gold, but it was about real gold. And there was a water scarcity issue, and managing the water boreholes, and of course, relations with Aboriginal communities or First Nations, and development of their economic region of the Western Australia. So at that time, there was the biggest water pipe built of their over 500 kilometers, pumping up water up with, I think, 8 pumping stations. So basically, it was that example of that integrated water resource on natural resource and infrastructure management that sustained peace within the communities, prevented their fights or conflicts around the water, and actually enhanced mining economic and regional development. And I think now it's time very much to reconsider this mining water management, particularly from this perspective, not just tailing dams, not just dewatering, not just water supply or desalination, but as a holistic picture, and understand where those hidden opportunities are, which enable not just democratization by default, but also additional sources of the revenue streams for the mining companies, and transferring the risks within the concession or within the context of operations of that concession. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Anna. That was fantastic. We'll move next on to Phil, please.
Right, thank you. I'm Phil Burris. So what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit further down the chain. Really, we're not looking at the global mega trends that Anna has outlined there, but there is a lot of similarity. We're basically looking at operational and corporate level mine management. And what I think is really clear from a previous presentation is that it's becoming absolutely imperative for all mine companies to start looking at their water footprint, greater efficiency in their water management, greater understanding, I suppose, of how the mine interacts with the wider catchment. And I was thinking about this presentation today, and the thing that comes out of it is that mines and their interaction with water is almost invariably the case that you've got too much water where you don't want it, and you haven't got enough where you need it. And that's kind of classically being handled, I suppose, by a number of sort of like engineering and almost utility-based interactions and interventions. So we see a mining project with its dewatering requirements and water supply, discharge treatment, flood risk management, the TSFs, and what used to be called diversions. And I'll talk about this a bit later, but now they're called other managed water. There's a reason for that, because we're trying to sort of get more inclusivity, I suppose, in terms of how the mine interacts with its catchment. So those classical engineering sort of utility approaches to mine management have almost in a sort of adverse way led to some mindsets where some of the externalities and as Anna was saying, the opportunity value of looking at sort of integrated systems, integrated in the sense that you might have intra-mining transfer and water balance, as well as inter-business or inter-industrial transfer of water. Those things have sort of been pushed aside because there's always this pressing need to deal with either too much water, too little water, and the kind of facility approach for managing that. But that's all changing. So we're now in this second point there of drivers of change. And again, as Anna pointed out, we're in this sort of like point of in between management and moving into stewardship. So stewardship is the recognition that you've got to go beyond compliance, really, as a member of the sort of like modern mining industry and representative of, say, the ICMM. And stewardship actually came about quite interestingly, I think, because there was a recognition that like all mining companies with access to their resources and their sophisticated technical consultants and equipment and everything like that, there was a complete asymmetry between that and the local host communities and their understanding of what is essentially water in their environment. And so at one point, you've got this paradigm of a shared resource and a shared risk. But on the operational level, there's quite different asymmetries in terms of how collective development is actually implemented. So stewardship's really come about from this approach of sort of saying, like, we've got to make sure that it's incumbent on organizations to be stewards of the water environment, but not just for their own enterprise purposes. It's quite an interesting area of development, really. And also these drivers of change are very much about, you know, like the viability, resilience, stranded asset nature of companies and businesses. And, you know, it's likely, and as we've seen in the previous presentation, that the recommendations and the predictions for water management are going to be stark, really, over the next 10 or coming decades. And obviously climate change, unpredictability. We're not even quite sure how much water we've got at hand, and we used to have the means of being able to say we've got a 1 in 100 year event or a 1 in a 10,000 year event, and all of that goes out the window a little bit with climate change because hydrological records are not able to repeat predictably what they used to. And where does this lead us to? It's basically integrated water resource management, multidisciplinary approaches, greater resilience for companies. So I'm an independent consultant. I've got no real affiliation with the ICMM, but it's a kind of good vehicle for explaining, I suppose, practice for water management within a mining operation. They basically released these guidelines this year, and it consolidates a lot of previous work, a lot of previous codes. We heard about the CDP and the GRI, and there was a bewildering amount of water reporting codes that have been in circulation in the last decade. And the problem has been consistency, application, how do you actually define water use, how much is recycled, and that kind of thing. So the ICMM, to their credit, has tried to address this and tackle it head on. And they basically put forward an approach which has got like inward looking management, and that sort of feeds into outward or external disclosure and reporting. So it's well worth a look. It's a very good set of materials. And as I said, I'm no particular advocate of it, but I am using it as a means of, in a very short time, running through operational water management practice. So what ICMM are saying, and what could be regarded as kind of current best practice, is you need to look at your site context, understand the catchment, your hydrology, but this goes beyond just like the physics and physical geography of it. We're looking at risks, boundaries, materiality, what's going to happen under the current phase of mining, in the future, in perpetuity, those kind of things. And then we go to the classic water balance approach. But again, that's been updated as well. So now there are these clearer definitions about what is used by the project, what are the minimum reporting requirements for membership of ICMM, and also this concept of sort of being accountable, for other managed water, which the mine interacts with. So yeah, we've got runoff, we've got sedimentation, we've got changes in the hydrologic regime, and they're all important now to be accounted for. The recommended approach then says, right, go in and start doing water accounting. And this means looking at your individual facilities, having a degree of granularity within your mine operation, understanding, using better definitions of water quality, like good quality, or not good, sorry, high and low water quality categories. These are now based just not on salinity, but on things like sediment content or biological content. So the whole water accounting process is now much more systematic and usable, I suppose, for that great goal that we have, which is not just benchmarking what we're doing and telling the world about reporting and disclosure, but about trying to seek opportunities, like trying to look for those kind of linkages within a project where you could say, well, this wastewater stream, if I did this to it and I tweaked it this way, could become a fantastic raw water supply for another purpose in the mine. So the whole approach of accounting and systematic evaluation of water at mine site is really about trying to make the whole process more efficient. Should also say that all of the stuff that's going on with water is kind of mirrored to a large degree in the world of tailings at the moment as well. You know, in terms of seeking smaller footprints, having oversight of the whole process, having global standards. These are things that are very much to the fore within the tailings world, and it's no surprise that the two things are interlinked. Essentially, projects that can control water, have smaller water footprints, more efficient systems are going to be intrinsically more cost effective, but they're going to have less liability and less hazard. So the process is again one of continual improvement. There's no magic switch to making a mine, you know, highly water efficient. All you can do is benchmark what's happening this year, look at the improvements, and then strive to set a target and reach that next year. The last point I put there, limits to efficiency. So, you know, you can't have 100% water cycling around a mine site. But the reality is that, you know, when you try and treat that last cubic meter of highly saline water, you know, you are spending exponential amounts of money to do that. And the whole carbon and energy and net environmental benefit balance means that you cannot ever get to that point of complete efficiency. So you need to understand, and this is what the ICMM guidelines set out as well, that the approach to understanding water management has to take into account net environmental benefit as well. Thank goodness. So here we are, external reporting. All of the previous stuff is sort of solid line linked to the minimum reporting requirements that ICMM require. And so we have these metrics in terms of water withdrawal, recycling, discharge, quality, and we've got narrative statements around that talk about things like risk, materiality, and your host communities in the catchment. So in essence, it's a pretty robust way of doing things, and it pulls in a lot of approaches which I think are very important. It's got certain kind of clever bits to it which actually make you start thinking in a more holistic way than perhaps previous balances and accounting. So overall, I think it is quite a good step forward in terms of providing a set of codes and rules to follow. And I'll just wrap up then. So overall, what we're trying to do is get to a more holistic understanding of water management at a time when stresses are increasingly rapidly causing mines to have to address their own water use, but also, you know, becoming very much part of the social license to operate discourse, and the climate change. Kind of the most tangible aspect of climate change that's going to be affecting us is, you know, the hydrological changes that are going to affect, you know, some of the most disadvantaged in the world. Now, this just is, you know, critical stuff really for the mining world to address, and I think the commitments set out in ICMM go a long way to, you know, looking at this quite squarely and maturely. So integration, bringing in different disciplines to work with each other, not just treating this as an engineering solution or an intervention that can be solved. It's a little bit more involved in that. You need expert advice on what is the value of water. And when we say value, we don't necessarily just mean the monetization or the monetary value. We're talking about non-use value and intergenerational equity and all sorts of stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that have to come in terms of that multidisciplinary view and that integrated view. But ultimately, the benefits of greater resilience against climate change shocks and increased economic performance and cost effectiveness are likely and to be material, to pay off. And I think what we're going to see in the future is that early movers on this are going to reap benefit, quite clearly on a lot of, sort of a lot of tangible, but also some intangible ways. Greater efficiency means averting costs. You're averting excess wastewater and energy and pollution and a smaller footprint. There's so many upsides and benefits to greater efficiency. It's not just about the blue water footprint. So that all leads to disclosure and reporting. It is pretty much mainstream now. There are minimum requirements to it. But the way I would look at it is that you're not just doing it for an external audience or the shareholders. It really is the means of being able to audit oneself's activities, and benchmark them, and look for those closed loop linkages and continuous improvement. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil. We'll move straight on to Megan, please.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Megan Allison. I'm the Group Environmental Specialist for Central Asia Metals. And actually, I'm going to be taking it down another level. So following on from kind of the corporate and kind of the group level, I'm going to be now focusing on tailings management for one, so stepping away from the water and focusing specifically on one of our operations, which is based in North Macedonia. So our Sasa zinc and lead mine is based in the Republic of Northern Macedonia. It's around 150 kilometers from the capital city of Skopje. It's an underground operation that began producing in 1966 and has been owned by Central Asia Metals since 2017. So Sasa is currently mining using the sub-level caving method. The ore is then transported to surface where it's processed through crushing, mill, flotation, etc. And then the concentration is then shipped to the smelters, whereas the waste product is stored on site. So at site, there is a series of 5 tailings facilities. These have been constructed using the downstream tailings construction method, TSF 1, 2, and 3.1. The naming system changes, are all closed facilities. Tailings facility 3.2 is currently entering closure, and TSF 4 is our active facility. As many of you may know, tailings facilities have been in the news a lot, probably since 2015, since kind of the first big incident in Brazil, and especially following the 2019 Bali incident. And since then, there has been a development and initiatives brought out by various bodies forming the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management. And actually ICMM have a big kind of role in this. And so the purpose of the GISTM, as it's known, is the ultimate goal is for zero harm to people and the environment with 0 human fatalities. So at present, CAML are doing disclosures in line with both the Church of England, and we are working towards our GISTM. We're hoping to be fully compliant 3 years from January 2021. So although we've got this great tailings management going on at the moment, and we are working towards improving our tailings management, in September 2020, we had a very short-term leakage of our tailings facility, so the active tailings facility TSF4. Although no one was hurt and it was very short-term, our tailings leaked into the local river. Following the incident, we have undergone an investigation with both local and international experts to determine what led to the failure. And it was concluded that it was due to water ingress along the liner of the facility, which resulted in a loss of strength and subsidence of the dam crest. The dam has now been fully repaired and operational improvements have been implemented. Sasa have been at full production since October 2020, so it was only for 1 month that production stopped. During this last year, we've actually been undertaking river remediation of the river. So during the first phase, we removed 95% of the tailings. And during the last phase, we've removed the remaining tailings where possible, as well as planting a number of trees and doing various other initiatives to kind of give back to the community, one of them being developing a local park, which I think opened last month. So it's been a good process. So moving on from kind of tailings incidents, I move on to the cut and fill project. So the cut and fill project at Sasa involves 3 different components. We have a new central decline, which will improve ventilation, as well as giving the opportunity for potential future electric vehicle use, because it's a larger access point. We have the construction of a paste backfill plant and associated reticulation system. Ooh. I'm not sure where those lines have come from. And paste backfill is a great way of reusing the waste material. So 40% of our waste material will be stored underground in excavation voids. So the reason this is very beneficial and is best practice, because it removes the need to place waste material at surface. So 40% of our waste will not need to go onto surface, it will go into excavation voids. And then the third component of the cut and fill project is the construction of a dry stack plant and dry stack tailings facility. So what are the benefits of this cut and fill project? There are a number of benefits, and these involve safer operation for the mine. It's actually maximum extraction of mineral resources using the cut and fill method. As I said, it's a reuse of material with 40% of the material to be stored underground as paste backfill material. It reduces the need for additional TSFs. So we're putting waste underground and the other waste will be stored on surface. So we won't need to construct downstream of TSF4. And as well as this, there are enhanced economic benefits. So it's actually got lower capex than building an additional TSF. So the key principles for dry stack. So dry stack tailings, the Mount Polly's incident, the independent review board identified 3 key principles recommended for good tailings management. These include removing surface water from impoundments, promoting unsaturated conditions of the tailings, and to achieve diluent conditions within the tailings. Filtered tailings or dry stack tailings actually meet all 3 of these objectives. So what actually are filtered tailings, first of all? So filtered tailings use dewatered material, which use technologies such as a filter press to produce a damp sand. So it's almost like your cafetiere and your coffee grounds. So you get that damp material left. There is still around 13 to 15% water. However, the majority of the water is removed. At Sasa, we're currently in the process of working with independent consultants like Peasold to design our dry stack facility. So we have the detailed design work being undertaken this year with operation and commissioning scheduled for Q4 of next year. So it's moving very quickly. So what are the advantages of dry stack tailings? So there are a number of dry stack tailings, number of advantages, sorry. One of the main one is physical stability. So when you're removing the water from tailings incidents, which tends to be the cause of several or a factor for tailings facilities failing, is due to saturation. So we've removed that water, you've got better physical stability than wet tailings. It's easier and safer to construct. There's better physical stability during flood and seismic events, which is an important factor, particularly in areas where you've got a large catchment. We're downstream of a mountainous area, so it's something to consider. It actually helps to improve chemical stability because you're reducing on preventing infiltration into the stack. So you're reducing the risk of leaching. The higher density material, so it requires a much smaller footprint required than a downstream normal wet facility. And at Sasa, we are building on our closed TSF 1 and 2. So we're actually negating the need to build any further downstream. So again, we'll be reducing our environmental impact. And then linking back to the other presentations, of course, there is the potential for reuse. So there's reusing the water from the thickener rather than abstraction. So you've got kind of the more circular economy there. But that's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I particularly enjoyed that one. That was close to my heart, that one. And we'll move on to David for our last panelist.
Okay, thank you. I presume everyone can see and hear me? Yep, good, excellent. Last and definitely least, the banker. There's been some fascinating talks there, actually. Both at the kind of macro level, and then as we narrow down more onto the kind of industry level, and then onto the site-specific level. And I suppose the easy answer to what does a bank see? Well, we see all of that, but we kind of place maybe a different emphasis on some of it. So I'll hopefully quite quickly get through what I need to say today. What are we talking about is the kind of traditional risk-based view that banks would have had in the past, and frankly clients would have as well. Very much what Anna was talking about. The de-risking. You have a project. You have a project. You know that there's the potential for bad things to go wrong. So how do you manage that? And we'll also hopefully move on to the new and kind of the way that we're beginning to look at the sector, which is looking at business opportunities and looking at the wider development aspects that mining projects can bring, because it's incumbent on us in institutions like the one that I work for, that we're looking at the wider development aspects of this. It's not just about the project, it's about what that project can bring in terms of benefits for the local communities, for the region, and for the nations that we work in. And then finally, just kind of touching on what we call a scale, the new frontier. And this is very much kind of at the other end of what Anna was talking about, the kind of monetization. What should we be looking at, and in what way, and where do we think this stuff can go in the medium term? And there's a lot of exciting things happening around that, some of which are bankable, some of which are not, but certainly as a financial institution, we would see ourselves as having a role to play in that and being able to kind of promote some of the things that are happening. So with no further ado, moving on to the traditional approach. Now, I work for the Environment and Sustainability Department, and we're looking at environmental health and safety and social risk. And frankly, up until a few years ago, it was viewed as a non-financial risk. And in fact, even if you look at some of the new regulations that are coming out now requiring disclosure around these issues, there's still terminology which views these types of risk as being non-financial, because it's not something that's directly impacting the balance sheet. I would suggest that it actually does directly impact the balance sheet, but the traditional view of this was that it was something a bit technical and something a bit strange, and the accountants didn't quite understand it. The financial regulators certainly didn't, so it was in its little box. With it, at EBRD, we're a publicly owned institution, so we have a mandate to look at sustainability issues. So perhaps we were a little bit ahead of the curve in the way that we looked at these risks, and we have some quite detailed requirements on what we expect projects to do. But the wider financial industry wasn't quite so much there. For them, it was about reputation. I know there was discussion there about the tailings issues becoming much more in the public eye in 2015 and 2019 with those spectacular and frankly horrific incidents in Brazil. I'm a little bit longer in the tooth, and my mind goes back to the 1990s, where there was the Baia Mare incident in Romania, and subsequent incidents which caused actually nearly international problems, where there were tailings failings and tailings dams failings which impacted the River Danube, and all of that really boiled down to some real reputational hit, both for the governments involved, for the companies involved, but also for the financiers. So the way that that kind of traditional view of EHSS issues was that we are looking to keep ourselves out of the papers. But as I said, I don't think there's any such thing as a non-financial risk. A risk is a risk, and if something goes wrong, it can cause a delay, resulting in a financial loss. It can result in fines, resulting in a loss. It can impact your reputation. Yes, well, if it impacts your reputation, then that's a financial risk as well. If people stop buying your stuff, if you start getting excluded from certain supply chains because of your reputation, that is a financial risk. And certainly, I think the vast majority of the financial sector now understands that and gets it. It was a long time coming. As I say, I've been doing this for 30 years, and for the first 20, most of the financial sector didn't get this, but now they do. And the kind of geometric growth and interest in this area in the financial sector is actually quite heartening to someone like myself, who's been banging their head against a brick wall for quite a long time. Here's the typo, that should be not. Numerous drivers in here. There's not just this kind of the increase in the level of public awareness. There is clear evidence of an increase in financial returns to financial institutions, and that is one of the biggest drivers you can have. But there's also regulation coming in this. In the past, regulation tended to be around some kind of vague requirements, and okay, there was clear compliance on emissions and discharges, that was all fine, but how do you actually look at the risk management and how that impacts the performance of a company? Regulation was pretty light. But in particular, coming out of Brussels now, there's a real drive for transparency and a real drive for clarity in companies to be able to explain to all of their stakeholders exactly what they're doing in this field and exactly what these risks are and what these risks could result in terms of the development and impacts to the company. So it's basically there's a new sheriff in town, and people are having to adapt to it. Looking at the issue itself, water really is almost an all-encompassing issue. The way that we look at water in relation to a mining project is not just the straight, you suck it out the ground, you use it, and you discharge it. Water is a key part of the performance of both the kind of environmental ecosystems, but also the social ecosystems that occur in those regions. The link to the social issues through the ability of others to use water resources in the area, biodiversity. It can impact on a whole host of other issues. We really look at water, and we require the projects that we work on to look at water in an integrated way. It's got to be done at the right scale, but it's also got to include all of the issues where those water impacts can be looked at. The idea of having an integrated impact assessment when you are looking at water issues is absolutely fundamental to us. And really, when we're working on projects, we cannot progress without that integrated approach. It's one of the fundamental things that we seek. And again, the rest of the financial community is caught up with that. They may not have quite the level of detail that we require, but the issues that we consider are the same that you will see from all other well, not all other, but the vast majority of sources of finance. People are beginning to understand this better and beginning to understand the way that you need to integrate that approach. And finally, looking at the sustainability of the water resource, it's an existential issue for projects. Being able to manage your water resource and being able to manage your water resource in a way that is acceptable to the communities that you're impacting. There is the technical side of sustainability, but then there's also, as Phil mentioned, the term social license to operate. You have to take that community with you so that there is an understanding there that it is extraordinarily difficult to operate a mining project in a territory or an area where you have a lack of acceptance from that local community. We tend to see that it's particularly if you're looking at project developments, if you're going to have a delay in a project, it's not typically because of a technical issue, and actually it's actually even more rare now that you're getting environmental issues. It's the social issues that are the key to looking at that. If people know that their livelihoods or their way of life could be impacted by a project, then they're going to object, unless they understand it and unless you have that good relationship with that local community and they understand what's going to happen and they agree with the project going forward. That kind of gives a quick summary of where we see the kind of risk management function and how that's developing. But looking on now onto this idea of potential monetization, well, there's a whole raft of things in here. We are seeing a lot of encouragement. We're giving a lot of encouragement, and we're seeing a lot of inquiries with regards to different types and new types of projects that are coming forward. This is a function, I think, of the countries that we work in. But traditionally, we were working with some very kind of standard metals. We were working with copper. We were working with gold. We were working with lead. We were working with zinc. Those are pretty straightforward. They're quite commonly occurring, and a typical project for us would involve that suite of metals. Well, again, the market's changing. We're seeing a high demand for lithium, manganese, rare earths, all sorts of others coming in. As the economy changes and the wider economy decarbonizes, there is a requirement now, and an increasing requirement for these other metals. And we've got a big drive from our shareholders to push us into these markets, and we're seeing a big demand from clients as well. Circular economy is a fantastic example for us. There's for those of you that don't know EBRD, we work in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, in North Africa, and we are quite limited to those geographical regions. So we are looking at an area that has quite a long tail legacy in mining operations. There's a lot of mines that have been operating there for a long time. There's many closed mines there. All of these were using technologies which at the moment would be viewed pretty much as outdated, and all of them have left behind tailings. And we've got a tremendous number of projects now that we're looking at, but we're looking at reprocessing these tailings, because there's a lot of still resource sat there sitting in the ground in these tailings dams. So there's a kind of double benefit for us. One, you're getting access to metals that you can then send to market, but then the second one is you are getting access to old tailing storage facilities that have typically been closed in some quite haphazard methods. Very, it poses very much a kind of legacy risk. Not only are we getting the upside in terms of the materials going to market, we're also getting the upside of the fact that you're left with a more complete, up-to-date and secure engineering solution to keep those the stability of the tailings as they're stored in the longer term. And a kind of final issue that we're looking at in terms of business development is that we very much see these projects as being catalysts for development. It says in here, what has mining ever done for us? Well, what do mines do? Well, they attract capital, they attract human resources, they develop infrastructure, and they require a supply chain. Frankly, if that's not a business opportunity, then I don't know what is. So if you have a project that's of a certain scale, then you have an opportunity to be able to develop beyond that. We very much look at the kind of the ability to leave an economic legacy. Projects have a finite lifetime. There will be a time where you exhaust that resource and you have to close the gate, you have to close, and then you have to move on. What you leave behind is very much a kind of measure of how we would view the longer term success of a project. So that's something that we want to bear in mind as well. And finally, scale. This is the type of way that we would look at these projects just in the whole. We've used tailings very much at the project level. We can evaluate the risks and opportunities there. I'm sure others will have a different view, and there's perhaps something that we as an institution are missing. Perhaps there's a wider scale they look at tailings. I'd be interested to hear your views on that. Water, however, is a bit of a different beast. Looking at it at the project level doesn't tell you all you need to know. you need to look at it at least a district or a regional level to be able to see what's possible. And as I said previously, you really need to look at it as a holistic approach. There are a number of disciplines that need to apply here, both, not just environmental specialists and social specialists, technical specialists, mining engineers. Everyone has a role to play in being able to manage this resource effectively and efficiently. So, I suppose it's that the last two things here are kind of plea from myself and from our institution. What we ask of projects is that, you have the right people looking at the issues in the right way and at the right level of scale. It sounds easy, but believe me, it's not. And just a thought for the developers that are out there with projects in their back pocket. You're managing your risks. That's fine. And as an institution, we would absolutely require that as a bare minimum. The question for you is, are you maximizing the opportunity? And thank you.
Thank you, David. That was fascinating to round off the panel talk. We've had some questions in. I'm just going to run through them. I think we have some time to deal with them. Sorry, I've lost who it's from, but I think it's somebody on the west coast of Canada. This is for Megan. To what extent did you engage with local communities after the tailings incident, and to what extent were they involved in finding your solution?
Okay, thank you. So with the tailings incident, from a technical perspective, we engaged with both international and in-country experts. However, that was from the technical perspective for finding the solution. So although we did involve the local government, local experts from Macedonia, that wasn't particularly the local community. However, with regards to informing the local community and dealing with the incident, so the cleanup, they were involved throughout the entire process. So we actually had a very strong relationship, both with the local community and the national community following the incident. And during the cleanup of the incident, they were heavily engaged with regards to what we were doing, how we were going to clean up. We used local labour where possible, and we informed them of what we were doing and stuck to the timeframes. And with regards to the cleanup process itself, I think they're actually extremely happy that we kept them informed, we were transparent and we were honest. And actually that's the key. So oddly enough, we actually have a very good relationship and almost environmental credentials now, and they're potentially stronger than they were previously because of how we dealt with the situation. So it's almost, because we've been transparent and honest, it has had actually positive effects with the local community. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, that does. I'm just going to stay with you if we can for the moment, Megan, because another question came in. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it.
That's fine.
I think it was, oh yes, here we go. Were you looking at dry stack prior to the discharge, or was it a driver by the failure?
No, so the dry stack and paste backfill, because they go hand in hand, projects were actually already in the pipeline and underway before the TSF4 incident occurred. So they were something we were already considering and looking to implement. However, we are delighted to now be implementing them, as the project will offer safer and environmentally and socially friendly tailings storage, and will help with the life of mine at Sasa. So it's a positive, but no, it wasn't the driver.
Thank you. David, we have a question in for you next. When assessing projects, would you say the risk, opportunities and technical elements are well communicated to you, or do you see gaps and areas for mining companies and consultants supporting them to improve? I imagine it's a case-by-case basis, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, very, very much. Yes and no. No, look, the answer is always yes in the end. We require a fairly chunky slice of information and a fairly detailed and robust risk assessment to be provided to us, so that we can carry out our due diligence and make an appraisal of the project. And that has to be to what we would class as best practice. So if a client or a consultant approaches us with something which doesn't quite come up to scratch, and that does happen, then again, we are a publicly owned institution, so we're very happy to work with clients and consultants to get the information package to the standard that's required. But we're, to be frank, we're seeing that less and less now in terms of poor quality coming through. The industry and the consulting world is a lot more knowledgeable now about the types of standards that institutions like ourselves have. So, typically we're seeing the quality of submissions to us improve. That goes not just for the environment and social side, but also for the technical side. We carry out some quite thorough internal due diligence on the technical side. So, yeah, look, there's still a way to go. There will always be room for improvement because the science advances, so our level of knowledge keeps moving forward, so everyone's always playing catch up with something. So you have to stay abreast of the way that the science is moving forward, and also the science of the impact assessment as well. So it's basically a case of stay on your toes. But if the position that we're in, we're perfectly happy and quite comfortable to work with our client base to make sure that the information at the right quality comes to us, if for no reason other than the fact that we then have to disclose that information to the project affected communities so that they understand the risks. It's all very well for me sat here in a lovely office in London wondering about what the impact's going to be. People live next door to the mine and they need to understand that even more than I do.
Just following on from that and what you said, would you therefore not consider a project if it hadn't addressed fully the risks? Would you throw it back to the company or the consultant and say you need to do better?
I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect project. There will always be issues that will require to be managed and addressed going forward. But there are projects where there is a risk that you can't mitigate and would be unacceptable for us. So yeah, yes, we walk away from projects, not very frequently, but it's not uncommon. For obvious reasons, I can't give you details and any of the specifics on that. But yes, we do see projects where the risk is unacceptable. And frankly, if it's unacceptable to us, you'll find the majority of financial institutions finding it unacceptable also.
We've got a question in that I think I'm just going to open up to the panel. Sorry, I've just got to find it again. Here we are. What are the good practices you offer to mining operations in water-stressed regions? Is there anybody that would particularly like to take that one? Or as a general comment?
At the risk of there being too much of me, I'll go very quickly and then leave it to other people. In water-stressed regions, we see cooperation at a regional level as being really key. So one of the things that we try and promote is a kind of nexus between the government, the regulators and industry and the local communities to look at water resources in I hate this word, but unfortunately I will say it, in a holistic way, so that everyone understands the resource, everyone understands what each other are doing with it, so that you can then come together with a longer term plan to how to manage that resource and make it more sustainable. I would tell people to go and look at the South Gobi Water Council in Mongolia and see what they're doing. It's a great example of what's possible.
I can add on the
I'd say, obviously there's no one.
Hold on, should we go to Phil first and then we'll come to you, Anna, afterwards, if that's okay?
Sure, yeah, there's no one size that fits all, but obviously the developments in dry and filtered tailings has to be looked at more sort of seriously, and in terms of a fit of that technology with water stressed areas. It's sometimes quite, I'm not saying, I'm not advocating that it's just one, the only approach, but it's often made difficult to reconcile the water balance and the footprint of a facility that has essentially got massive evaporation potential and is recirculating huge quantities of slurified tailings in an environment where there is such a premium on water resources. So the thickened tailings isn't the only solution, but that kind of approach of looking at your facility and saying, like, what has got a small footprint, and where can we, create opportunity, is really what has to be applied in that environment, I think.
Anna, would you like to add to that one?
Certainly. So there are 3 levels. There is information level, then there is a physical level in terms of their water flows. First one, information flows. Second one, water flows. Third one, transactional cash flows. Be it within the company, as they're in terms of their balance sheet management or P&L. And then, of course, it's their external, it's a basically responsible supply chain. So we have upstream and then we have downstream. Best practices split. Speaking about the informational flow, to speed up the communication process and ensure that basically mine downtime, minimizing the mining downtime or suspension of the operations due to miscommunication or compliance with some regulatory issues or some community conflicts. Ideally, there would be shared water ledger information in place. And that's going to be exactly where we would actually measure how much water in, how much water out, not just in terms of the GRI metrics or ICMM, but in terms of their context sensitive metrics, understanding how much water is in aquifer, how does it impact their 50 kilometers downstream, upstream, or within the set boundaries. And there are examples already in that. So there's a perfect example in Australia where 12 mining companies are collaborating around that with communities. However, the challenge there is around the orchestrating that. There should be a leadership position of one particular leader who would be orchestrating that. That's a subject to discussion to the local context again. So that's information flow. The second challenge to that is privacy of information. To eliminate that, there should be a sort of, it's a part of the security discussion, and translating their operational information into their common language, and basically creating sort of a benchmarking. And ideally, to incentivize people to engage into that, it can be done also in the very active sort of a gamification way. That's sort of some of their high-level best practices around the information management. Tying it to their physical management of the flows. So water is essentially, we have waters, different states, snow, underground, surface, and rain. We cannot control rain, but certainly we control evaporation. Can we cover the ponds with the solar panels? Yes. Anglo-Americans doing it a lot and very well in terms of their infrastructure management. Can we try to minimize their the acid drainage? Possibly, yes. How much does it cost? Whether it provides net benefits, subject to the feasibility study. Ideally, again, it comes back into their tying it all into the information management system, not this time external, but internal. And there are a number of companies that already has this internal water management system, not just accounting mechanism or accountability, but also in terms of their operational efficiency, trying to basically monitor all the water flows, recycling, reuse, and basically what's going in and out, because between the water in and water out, there is a black box. It's like in banking and trading. Until 2008 collapsed, there was in and out, and there was a black box until it was removed by regulators. So there is a lot of similarities between different industries. And last but not the least, once their house is in order, information and their actual flows, underground, surface, evaporation, then of course it's much easier to deal with responsible supply chain management, and similar to scope 1 to 3, 4, 5, basically. Then moving to their another level, basically collaboration with external stakeholders, understanding also once they understand their also impact is actually, now we can talk about the water transfers. Water transfers between the agriculture and mining, water transfers between their other stakeholders. It's all down to the, of course, subject to the local variability and availability of water throughout the year. Do we need storage facilities? Do we need canals to transfer the water? What is that we do? We have excess of water at a particular time of the year. How much is going to cost us? Or so there's all those questions should be thrown and can be sort of, imagine one Google shared document or monkey survey to minimize their actually manual labor, and trying to engage all of that in like a Google Doc but of course in a slightly more sophisticated level to engage in that, and of course monitor the progress, where we started, where we are, where we're going, and measure it against, of course, the climate change, because it's intensifying. That's it.
Thank you. That was a really full answer there. We've got, I think, time for one last question, and I'm just going to scroll up again so I can find where it's come in. Megan, it's back to you. With your plans to align with the GISTM, how does it affect your environmental management system?
So this is probably going to be quite a short answer. Really, GISTM promotes best practice. So it's going to have a positive effect on our environmental management systems, where better data capture is required, data storage, libraries for information, etc. All of these components are going to improve our environmental management system, if anything. So I guess that's a summary of. I won't go into details of how it will improve it, because we're still working on it. We've been working on it since January. So we're actually relatively aligned with GISTM. We've had positive responses. However, we are still working on it, and we will be for the next few years. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, GISTM is founded on that it should be a supporting, and it's not supposed to be a negative impact. So obviously,
exactly, it's always going to be positive. Yeah.
Yeah, might be difficult to do, but it's always going to be positive. Right. I think that is our end of our questions and answers. That's been a great panelist, I think. I hope everyone agrees, and I'm going to hand over for some closing remarks.
Great. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, Beth, and thank you to all our speakers. We stayed on a little bit longer today because we felt the discussion was going so well. We didn't want to stop you there, and we obviously wanted to answer all of your questions. Huge thanks to Wardell Armstrong for taking part today and helping us organize this event. It's been very informative. If it's your first time joining one of our events, Women in Mining is a volunteer-run, not-for-profit organization which promotes the employment, retention, and progress of women in the mining industry. Everyone is welcome to become a member of WIM UK, regardless of gender or where you are located in the world. I see we have a couple of people who have logged on from other countries, so thank you for joining us. Go to our website now to join. Membership is free. And November is a busy month for Women in Mining UK. Our next event is scheduled on the 10th of November, kindly supported by Pinsent Mason on renewable energy in mining, followed by a joint MinSouth and WIM UK event on the 23rd of November, where we will be diving into the topic of diversity in mining and Indigenous females' perspective. I'm really looking forward to that discussion. Please do look out for further event information and registration details. They'll be up on our website and in our newsletter. Wherever you're dialing in from, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.